Section 24 of On Benefits. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathrine E. On Benefits by Seneca, translated by Aubrey Stewart. Book-7, chapters 17 to 32. 17. I think here we ought to make a distinction in order to render this point more intelligible. Benefits are of two kinds. One, the perfect and true benefit, which can only be bestowed by one wise man upon another. The other, the common vulgar form which ignorant men like ourselves interchange. With regard to the latter, there is no doubt that it is my duty to repay it whether my friend turns out to be a murderer, a thief, or an adulterer. Crimes have laws to punish them. Criminals are better reformed by judges than by ingratitude. A man ought not to make you bad by being so himself. I will fling a benefit back to a bad man. I will return it to a good man. I do so to the latter because I owe it to him, to the former that I may not be in his debt. 18. With regard to the other class of benefit, the question arises whether, if I was not able to take it without being a wise man, I am able to return it, except to a wise man. For suppose I do return it to him, he cannot receive it. He is not any longer able to receive such a thing. He has lost the knowledge of how to use it. You would not bid me throw back, i.e., in the game of a ball to a man who has lost his hand. It is folly to give any one what he cannot receive. If I am to begin to reply to the last argument, I say that I should not give him what he is unable to take, but I would return it, even though he is not able to receive it. I cannot lay him under an obligation unless he takes my bounty, but by returning it I can free myself from my obligations to him. You say, he will not be able to use it. Let him see to that. The fault will lie with him, not with me. 19. To return a thing, says our adversary, is to hand it over to one who can receive it. Why, if you owed some wine to any man, and he bade you pour it into a net or a sieve, would you say that you had returned it? Or would you be willing to return it in such a way that in the act of returning it was lost between you? To return is to give that which you owe back to its owner, when he wishes for it. It is not my duty to perform more than this. That he should possess what he has received from me is a matter for further consideration. I do not owe him the safe keeping of his property, but the honorable payment of my debt, and it is much better that he should not have it than that I should not return it to him. I would repay my creditor, even though he would at once take what I paid him to the market. Even if he deputed an adulteress to receive the money from me, I would pay it to her. Even if he were to pour the coins which he receives into a loose fold of his cloak, I would pay it. It is my business to return it to him, not to keep it and save it for him after I have returned it. I am bound to take care of his bounty when I have received it, but not when I have returned it to him. While it remains with me, it must be kept safe, but when he asks for it again, I must give it to him, even though it slips out of his hands as he takes it. I will repay a good man when it is convenient. I will repay a bad man when he asks me to do so. You cannot, argues our adversary, return him a benefit of the same kind as that which you received, for you received it from a wise man, and you are returning it to a fool. Do I not return to him such a benefit as he is now able to receive? It is not my fault if I return it to him worse than I received it. The fault lies with him, and so, unless he regains his former wisdom, I shall return it in such a form as he in his fallen condition is able to receive. But what, asks he, if he become not only bad, but savage and ferocious, like Apollodorus or Phalaris, would you return even to such a man as this a benefit which you had received from him? I answer, nature does not admit of so great a change in a wise man. Men do not change from the best to the worst. Even in becoming bad, he would necessarily retain some traces of goodness. Virtue is never so utterly quenched as not to imprint on the mind marks which no degradation can efface. If wild animals bred in captivity escape into the woods, they still retain something of their original tameness, and are as remote from the gentlest in the one extreme as they are in the other from those which have always been wild, and have never endured to be touched by man's hand. No one who has ever applied himself to philosophy ever becomes completely wicked. His mind becomes so deeply colored with it that its tints can never be entirely spoiled and blackened. In the next place, I ask whether this man of yours be ferocious merely in intent, or whether he breaks out into actual outrages upon mankind. You have instanced the tyrants Apollodorus and Phalaris. If the bad man restrains their evil likeness within himself, why should I not return his benefit to him, in order to set myself free from any further dealings with him? If, however, he not only delights in human blood, but feeds upon it, if he exercises his insatiable cruelty in the torture of persons of all ages, and his fury is not prompted by anger, but by a sort of delight in cruelty, if he cuts the throats of children before the eyes of their parents, if, not satisfied with merely killing his victims, he tortures them, and not only burns but actually roasts them, if his castle is always wet with freshly shed blood, then it is not enough not to return his benefits. All connection between me and such a man has been broken off by his destruction of the bonds of human society. If he had bestowed something upon me, but were to invade my native country, he would have lost all claim to my gratitude, and it would be counted a crime to make him any return. If he does not attack my country, but is a scourge of his own, if he has nothing to do with my nation, but torments and cuts to pieces his own, then in the same manner such depravity, though it does not render him my personal enemy, yet renders him hateful to me, and the duty which I owe to the human race is anterior to and more important than that which I owe to him as an individual. 20. However, although this be so, and although I am freed from all obligation towards him, from the moment when, by outraging all laws, he rendered it impossible for any man to do him a wrong, nevertheless I think I ought to make the following distinction in dealing with him. If my repayment of his benefit will neither increase nor maintain his powers of doing mischief to mankind, and is of such a character that I can return it to him without disadvantage to the public, I would return it. For instance, I would save the life of his infant child, for what harm can this benefit do to any of those who suffer from his cruelty? But I would not furnish him with money to pay his bodyguard. If he wishes for marbles or fine clothes, the trappings of his luxury will harm no one, but with soldiers and arms I would not furnish him. If he demands, as a great boon, actors and courtesans and such things as will soften his savage nature, I would willingly bestow them upon him. I would not furnish him with triremes and brass-beaked ships of war, but I would send him fast-sailing and luxuriously fitted vessels, and all the toys of kings who take their pleasure on the sea. If his health was altogether despaired of, I would by the same act bestow a benefit on all men and return one to him, seeing that for such characters death is the only remedy, and that he who never will return to himself had best leave himself. However, such wickedness as this is uncommon, and is always regarded as a portent, as when the earth opens, or when fire breaks forth from caves under the sea. So let us leave it, and speak of those vices which we can hate without shuddering at them. As for the ordinary bad man, whom I can find in the marketplace of any town, who is feared only by individuals, I would return to him a benefit which I had received from him. It is not right that I should profit by his wickedness. Let me return what is not mine to its owner. Whether he be good or bad makes no difference, but I would consider the matter most carefully, if I were not returning, but bestowing it. 21. This point requires to be illustrated by a story. A certain Pythagorean bought a fine pair of shoes from a shoemaker, and as they were an expensive piece of work, he did not pay ready money for them. Some time afterward he came to the shop to pay for them, and after he had long been knocking at the closed door, someone said to him, "Why do you waste your time? The shoemaker whom you seek has been carried out of his house and buried. This is a grief to us who lose our friends for ever, but by no means so to you, who know that he will be born again," jeering at the Pythagorean. Upon this our philosopher not unwillingly carried his 3 or 4 denarii home again, shaking them every now and then. Afterwards, blaming himself for the pleasure which he had secretly felt at not paying his debt, and perceiving that he enjoyed having made this trifling again, he returned to the shop, and saying, "The man lives for you, pay him what you owe," he passed 4 denarii into the shop through the crack of the closed door, and let them fall inside, punishing himself for his unconscionable greediness, that he might not form the habit of appropriating that which is not his own. 22. If you owe anything, seek for some one to whom you may repay it, and if no one demands it, done your own self. Whether the man be good or bad is no concern of yours. Repay him, and then blame him. You have forgotten how your several duties are divided. It is right for him to forget it, but we have bidden you bear it in mind. When, however, we say that he who bestows a benefit ought to forget it, it is a mistake to suppose that we rob him of all recollection of the business, though it is most creditable to him. Some of our precepts are stated over strictly in order to reduce them to their true proportions. When we say that he ought not to remember it, we mean he ought not to speak publicly or boast of it offensively. There are some who, when they have bestowed a benefit, tell it in all societies, talk of it when sober, cannot be silent about it when drunk, force it upon strangers, and communicate it to friends. It is to quell this excessive and reproachful consciousness that we bid him who gave it forget it, and by commanding him to do this, which is more than he is able, encourage him to keep silence. 23. When you distrust those whom you order to do anything, you ought to command them to do more than enough, in order that they may do what is enough. The purpose of all exaggeration is to arrive at the truth by falsehood. Consequently, he who spoke of horses as being whiter than snows and swifter than the winds, said what could not possibly be, in order that they might be thought to be as much so as possible. And he who said, more firm than crags, more headlong than the stream, did not suppose that he should make any one believe that a man could ever be as firm as a crag. Exaggeration never hopes all its daring flights to be believed, but affirms what is incredible, and thereby it may convey what is credible. When we say, let the man who has bestowed a benefit forget it, what we mean is, let him be as though he had forgotten it. Let not his remembrance of it appear or be seen. When we say that repayment of a benefit ought not to be demanded, we do not utterly forbid its being demanded. For repayment must often be extorted from bad men, and even good men require to be reminded of it. Am I not to point out the means of repayment to one who does not perceive it? Am I not to explain my wants to one who does not know them? Why should he, if a bad man, have the excuse, or, if a good man, have the sorrow of not knowing them? Men ought sometimes to be reminded of their debts, though with modesty, not in the tone of one demanding a legal right. 24. Socrates once said in the hearing of his friends, I would have bought a cloak if I had had the money for it. He asked no one for money, but he reminded them all to give it. There was a rivalry between them as to who should give it, and how should there not be? Was it not a small thing which Socrates received? Yes, but it was a great thing to be the man from whom Socrates received it. Could he blame them more gently? I would, said he, have bought a cloak if I had had the money for it." After this, however eager any one was to give, he gave too late, for he had already been wanting in his duty to Socrates. Because some men harshly demand repayment of debts, we forbid it, not in order that they may never be done, but that they may be done sparingly. 25. Aristippus once, when enjoying a perfume, said, "Bad luck to those effeminate persons who have brought so nice a thing into disrepute." We also may say, "Bad luck to those base extortioners who pester us for a fourfold return on their benefits, and have brought into disrepute so nice a thing as reminding our friends of their duty." I shall nevertheless make use of this right of friendship, and I shall demand the return of a benefit from any man from whom I would not have scrupled to ask for one, such a man as would regard the power of returning a benefit as equivalent to receiving a second one. Never, not even when complaining of him, would I say, "A wretch forlorn upon the shore he lay, his ship, his comrades, all were swept away. Fool that I was, I pitied his despair, and even gave him of my realm a share." This is not to remind, but to reproach. This is to make one's benefits odious, to enable him, or even to make him wish, to be ungrateful. It is enough, and more than enough, to remind him of it gently and familiarly. "If aught of mine hath e'er deserved thy thanks." To this his answer would be, "Of course you have deserved my thanks. You took me up, a wretch forlorn upon the shore." 26. But, says our adversary, suppose that we gain nothing by this, suppose that he pretends that he has forgotten it, what ought I to do? You now ask a very necessary question, and one which fitly concludes this branch of the subject, how, namely, one ought to bear with the ungrateful. I answer, calmly, gently, magnanimously. Never let any one's discourtesy, forgetfulness, or ingratitude enrage you so much that you do not feel any pleasure at having bestowed a benefit upon him. Never let your wrongs drive you into saying, "I wish I had not done it." You ought to take pleasure even in the ill success of your benefit. He will always be sorry for it, even though you are not even now sorry for it. You ought not to be indignant, as if something strange had happened. You ought rather to be surprised if it had not happened. Some are prevented by difficulties, some by expense, and some by danger from returning your bounty. Some are hindered by a false shame, because by returning it they would confess that they had received it. With others, ignorance of their duty, indolence, or excess of business stands in the way. Reflect upon the insatiability of men's desires. You need not be surprised if no one repays you in a world in which no one ever gains enough. What man is there of so firm and trustworthy a mind that you can safely invest your benefits in him? One man is crazed with lust, another is the slave of his belly, another gives his whole soul to gain, caring nothing for the means by which he amasses it. Some men's minds are disturbed by envy, some blinded by ambition till they are ready to fling themselves on the sword's point. In addition to this, one must reckon sluggishness of mind and old age, and also the opposites of these, restlessness and disturbance of mind, also excessive self-esteem and pride in the very things for which a man ought to be despised. I need not mention obstinate persistence in wrong-doing, or frivolity which cannot remain constant to one point. Besides all this, there is headlong rashness, there is timidity which never gives us trustworthy counsel, and the numberless errors with which we struggle, the rashness of the most cowardly, the quarrels of our best friends, and the most common evil of trusting in what is most uncertain, and of undervaluing, when we have obtained it, that which we once never hoped to possess. Amidst all these restless passions, how can you hope to find a thing so full of rest as good faith? 27. If a true picture of our life were to rise before your mental vision, You would, I think, behold a scene like that of a town just taken by storm, where decency and righteousness were no longer regarded, and no advice is heard but that of force, as if universal confusion were the word of command. Neither fire nor sword are spared, crime is unpunished by the laws, even religion, which saves the lives of suppliants in the very midst of armed enemies, does not check those who are rushing to secure plunder. Some men rob private houses, some public buildings. All places, sacred or profane, are alike stripped. Some burst their way in, others climb over. Some open a wider path for themselves by overthrowing the walls that keep them out, and make their way to their booty over ruins. Some ravage without murdering, others brandish spoils dripping with their owner's blood. Every one carries off his neighbor's goods. In this greedy struggle of the human race, surely you forget the common lot of all mankind, if you seek among these robbers for one who will return what he has got. If you are indignant at men being ungrateful, you ought also to be indignant at their being luxurious, avaricious, and lustful. You might as well be indignant with sick men for being ugly, or with old men for being pale. It is indeed a serious vice, it is not to be borne, and sets men at variance with one another. Nay, it rends and destroys that union by which alone our human weakness can be supported, yet it is so absolutely universal that even those who complain of it most are not themselves free from it. 28. Consider within yourself whether you have always shown gratitude to those to whom you owe it, whether no one's kindness has ever been wasted upon you, whether you constantly bear in mind all the benefits which you have received. You will find that those which you received as a boy were forgotten before you became a man, that those bestowed upon you as a young man slipped from your memory when you became an old one. Some we have lost, some we have thrown away, some have by degrees passed out of sight, to some we have wilfully shut our eyes. If I am to make excuses for your weakness, I must say in the first place that human memory is a frail vessel and is not large enough to contain the mass of things placed in it. The more it receives, the more it must necessarily lose. The oldest things in it give way to the newest. Thus it comes to pass that your nurse has hardly any influence with you, because the lapse of time has set the kindness which you received from her at so great a distance. Thus it is that you no longer look upon your teacher with respect, and that now when you are busy about your candidature for the consulate or the priesthood, you forget those who supported you in your election to the quaestorship. If you carefully examine yourself, perhaps you will find the vice of which you complain in your own bosom. You are wrong in being angry with the universal failing, and foolish also, for it is your own as well. You must pardon others, that you may yourself be acquitted. You will make your friend a better man by bearing with him. You will in all cases make him a worse one by reproaching him. You can have no reason for rendering him shameless. Let him preserve any remnants of modesty which he may have. Too loud reproaches have often dispelled a modesty which might have borne good fruit. No man fears to be that which all men see that he is. When his fault is made public, he loses his sense of shame. 29. You say, I have lost the benefit which I bestowed. Yet do we say that we have lost what we consecrate to heaven, and a benefit well bestowed, even though we get an ill return for it, is to be reckoned among things consecrated. Our friend is not such a man as we hoped he was, still let us, unlike him, remain the same as we were. The loss did not take place when he proved himself so. His ingratitude cannot be made public without reflecting some shame upon us, since to complain of the loss of a benefit is a sign that it was not well bestowed. As far as we are able, we ought to plead with ourselves on his behalf. Perhaps he was not able to return it. Perhaps he did not know of it. Perhaps he will still do it. A wise and forbearing creditor prevents the loss of some debts by encouraging his debtor and giving him time. We ought to do the same. We ought to deal tenderly with a weakly sense of honor. 30. I have lost, you say, the benefit which I bestowed. You are a fool, and do not understand when your loss took place. You have indeed lost it, but you did so when you gave it. The fact has only now come to light. Even in the case of those benefits which appear to be lost, gentleness will do much good. The wounds of the mind ought to be handled as tenderly as those of the body. The string, which might be disentangled by patience, is often broken by a rough pull. What is the use of abuse or of complaints? Why do you overwhelm him with reproaches? Why do you set him free from his obligation? Even if he be ungrateful, he owes you nothing after this. What sense is there in exasperating a man on whom you have conferred great favours, so as out of a doubtful friend to make a certain enemy, and one too who will seek to support his own cause by defaming you, or to make men say, I do not know what the reason is that he cannot endure a man to whom he owes so much, there must be something in the background. Any man can asperse, even if he does not permanently stain the reputation of his betters by complaining of them, nor will any one be satisfied with imputing small crimes to them, when it is only by the enormity of his falsehood that he can hope to be believed. 31. What a much better way is that by which the semblance of friendship, and, indeed, if the other regains to his right mind, friendship itself is preserved. Bad men are overcome by unwearying goodness, nor does any one receive kindness in so harsh and hostile a spirit as not to love good men even while he does them wrong, when they lay him under the additional obligation of requiring no return for their kindness. Reflect, then, upon this. You say, my kindness has met with no return. What am I to do? I ought to imitate the gods, those noblest disposers of all events, who begin to bestow their benefits on those who know them not, and persist in bestowing them on those who are ungrateful for them. Some reproach them with neglect of us, some with injustice towards us. Others place them outside of their own world, in sloth and indifference, without light, and without any functions. Others declare that the sun itself, to whom we owe the division of our times of labour and of rest, by whose means we are saved from being plunged in the darkness of eternal night, who, by his circuit, orders the seasons of the year, gives strength to our bodies, brings forth our crops and ripens our fruits, is merely a mass of stone, or a fortuitous collection of fiery particles, or anything rather than a god. Yet, nevertheless, like the kindest of parents, who only smile at the spiteful words of their children, the gods do not cease to heap benefits upon those who doubt from what source their benefits are derived, but continue impartially distributing their bounty among all the peoples and nations of the earth. Possessing only the power of doing good, they moisten the land with seasonable showers, they put the seas in movement by the winds, they make time by the course of the constellations, they temper the extremes of heat and cold, of summer and winter, by breathing a milder air upon us, and they graciously and serenely bear with the faults of our erring spirits. Let us follow their example. Let us give, even if much be given to no purpose. Let us, in spite of this, give to others, nay, even to those upon whom our bounty has been wasted. No one is prevented by the fall of a house from building another. When one home has been destroyed by fire, we lay the foundations of another before the site has had time to cool. We rebuild ruined cities more than once upon the same spots, so untiring are our hopes of success. Men would undertake no works either on land or sea, if they were not willing to try again what they have failed in once. 32. Suppose a man is ungrateful, he does not injure me, but himself. I had the enjoyment of my benefit when I bestowed it upon him. Because he is ungrateful, I shall not be slower to give, but more careful. What I have lost with him, I shall receive back from others. But I will bestow a second benefit upon this man himself, and will overcome him, even as a good husbandman overcomes the sterility of the soil by care and culture. If I do not do so, my benefit is lost to me, and he is lost to mankind. It is no proof of a great mind to give and to throw away one's bounty. The true test of a great mind is to throw away one's bounty and still to give. End of section 24. End of On Benefits by Seneca. Translated by Aubrey Stewart.